Welcome to the Workplace Minute, powered by H3HR Advisors and sponsored by WorkHuman. Thanks for joining me for your quick update on what's important in the world of work. My name is Steve Boese. Today in the Workplace Minute, we're talking about one of the more stunning workplace stories of the year so far. Former AT&T employees suing the company and claiming that age discrimination was part of the reason that they lost their jobs. On one level, this is a legal story about wrongful termination claims tied to return to office and relocation mandates. But on another level, it's a much bigger story about how some employers continue to think about age, experience, loyalty, and who they believe belongs in the future of work. And if the allegations in these lawsuits are even close to being true, then this is not just a bad look for AT&T, it's also a warning sign for every HR leader and executive team in the country. Let's break it down. To understand these lawsuits, you have to go back to the changes AT&T began making in 2023. That year, the company moved to sharply reduce its in-office footprint and consolidate managers into a smaller number of hub locations. Reporting at that time said AT&T was reducing hundreds of office sites down to 9 metro hub locations and requiring many managers to be in the office for at least part of the work week. Around 9,000 of roughly 60,000 managers were told that they would need to relocate to one of those hubs or lose their jobs. Then in late 2024, AT&T tightened the screws further and announced a 5-day in-office requirement starting in January 2025. So this was not one isolated policy tweak. It was a multi-step workplace restructuring and shift in work design. Fewer locations, forced relocation for some managers, followed by a full 5-day return to office mandate. And the scale of the broader workforce reduction matters here too. Business Insider reported that the company had around 160,000 employees at the start of 2023. AT&T's own annual reports showed it employed about 150,000 people as of early 2024 and about 141,000 as of December 2024. And only about 133,000 as of December 2025. So that's a decline of roughly 27,000 employees across 3 years. On top of the original hub consolidation, AT&T also later directed managers in parts of its internal help desk organization to relocate from 22 centers down to 6 locations or accept a severance package. So whether you call it restructuring, simplification, cost-cutting, or culture change, the practical reality is that AT&T has been shedding people while also making physical attendance at work a much harder requirement. So let's look at the lawsuits themselves. Recent reporting says 2 former employees, Lorraine Lopez and Kimberly Wall, who are both in their late 50s, allege AT&T's relocation and return to office policies were used in a discriminatory way that disproportionately pushed out older workers. Lopez says she was effectively forced out after about 30 years with the company, and Wall's suit reportedly includes age discrimination claims as well as gender and disability-related claims after her request to continue working remotely was denied. Now, AT&T has denied the allegations and says the suits are baseless. That point does matter. These are still just claims and not findings, but they're serious claims, and they become even more serious because of what the complainants say CEO of AT&T, John Stankey, told employees in a 2023 internal meeting. According to the lawsuit reporting and complaint excerpts, Stankey said, quote, "The profile of our workforce does not match the profile of the population of the United States and the customer base, both in terms of matching it demographically and matching it from an age perspective. We need younger people working at this company," end quote. Let's just sit with that for a second. We need younger people working at this company. There are executives who think that kind of thing. There are executives that hint at that kind of thing. But to allegedly say it that directly out loud in a company setting is pretty stunning. If that quote is accurate, and AT&T has not denied that it is, then it sounds less like modern talent strategy and more like a tutorial in what not to say if you want to avoid advertising potential age bias to your own workforce. And yes, there's an extra layer of hypocrisy here that's impossible to ignore. John Stankey, AT&T CEO, was born in 1962. So he's currently 63 or 64 years old. He's a baby boomer. So that message, at least as it stands publicly, starts to sound pretty absurd, right? We need younger workers, but not just younger leadership. We need fresh blood, just not in the corner office. We need to reduce our age profile, but apparently one of the oldest and certainly the most powerful persons in the organization, they're exempt from that logic. That contradiction is part of why this story hit such a nerve for me. It's not just the possibility of discrimination, it's the possibility of discrimination wrapped in this executive self-exemption. And here's what makes this especially out of touch right now. Older workers are not some niche segment of the labor market. They're massive, and they're a growing part of the labor market. BLS employment projections show the U.S. labor force aged 55 and older at about 21 million people in 2024, and that's projected to keep rising throughout the next decade. The same BLS table shows workers 55 and older make up about 12.5% of the labor force. Separately, BLS annual averages for 2025 show about 26.5 million employed workers aged 55 to 64 and another 11 million aged 65 and over. So that's a total of 38 million employed people 55 and up. In other words, older workers are not fading from the workforce. They are a core part of the workforce. And the participation story matters too. BLS projections show labor force participation rising for these older cohorts, even as some younger and prime age participation rates flatten or soften. For workers aged 55 to 64, the participation rate is projected to rise. And for workers 65 to 74, it might rise again. So for workers 75 and older, it may be as high as 12%. So any executive still acting as if the 55 plus workers are peripheral, outdated, or somehow less relevant to the future economy is just being unfair. They're ignoring where the labor market is going. This is where the leadership and HR lessons come in. Older workers bring institutional memory, customer understanding, judgment, resilience, mentoring capacity, and often a steadiness that organizations desperately need in periods of disruption. That does not mean every long-tenured employee is automatically a high performer. Of course not. Performance standards should apply to everybody. But there's a world of difference between managing performance and engineering a culture that creates age itself as a problem to be solved. The first is leadership. The second is discrimination. And too many companies blur that line when they start talking about agility, future readiness, or transformation. So my closing thought here is simple. If you're an HR leader and you're participating in this kind of thinking, whether openly or quietly, whether intentionally or by just going along with it, you need to take a very hard look at yourself. Because this is not just about legal exposure, it's about values. It's about whether you truly believe talent, contribution, and dignity belong to workers of every age. Older workers have just as much value, just as much capability, and just as much right to fair treatment as anyone else in the workforce. And any company that forgets that is not building the future of work. It's just repeating one of the oldest workplace failures in the book. That's it for the show today. A big thank you to WorkHuman for supporting the Workplace Minute. Be sure to subscribe to the HR Happy Hour Network on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Steve Boese, and this has been the Workplace Minute from H3 HR Advisors.